Let's take a few minutes and talk about the Denison Barb. It's also known as the Roseline shark in North America and commonly also known as the red line torpedo barb. It's all the same fish. Let's talk about what it is, where it comes from, and how do you keep it happy in a glass box. This fish was first described by Francis Day in 1865. So we've known about this fish for well over 150 years, but it hasn't become a mainstay in the hobby till relatively recently, within the last 2 decades or so. It was named after Sir William Denison, who has several other fish named after him as well. The genus name, however, has changed through the years, and it has settled on something I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce right. It's Sahyadria denison, and this fish originally got placed in the puntus, and at one time it even wound up in the labio genus with like the red-tailed shark. Now it's in a genus that only has two species, and they're both very similar, only the Denison Barb is more colorful than the other one, although they look kind of alike. The Denison Barb is the one that is now being bred in captivity today that you'll see in your pet shop. Just a bit of useless information that you might want to know. The genus name itself, the Sahyadria, is a play on the word Sahyadri. I think that's how you pronounce it. I could be way wrong. Somebody from India is probably cringing right now. But anyways, the Sahyadri is actually the location where this fish is found. So that kind of explains why the genus has only got the two species, is because it's kind of a locality is the genus name. Anyways, just some useless information you might want to know. Like I said earlier, this fish was discovered in 1865, but actual exports of the fish to the aquarium trade really didn't happen until the kind of the later 90s or mid 90s. However, it took off like wildfire. And in 2007, according to my research, it was the most exported fish out of India. Unfortunately, all those fish were being taken out of the wild, and due to habitat loss and it being the most popular aquarium fish being exported out of India, its population crashed. And it crashed pretty hard. And it crashed to the point where they said, okay, we're going to put it on the IUCN Red List. It's now endangered. And all that did was drive the price of the fish up, and poaching became an issue, and it did not help the population of this fish in the wild at all. And it wasn't until, I don't know, somewhere in the later 2000s, some research started getting done where, using hormones, they were able to reproduce this fish under captive conditions and make it more available. So the fish you're seeing today, you can, rest assured that the chances are, if you walk into a pet shop in North America, you're buying a captive bred fish and not a fish that's coming out of the wild. I tried to do a little bit of research to see if its population has stabilized at all since then, and I really haven't seen a lot of information on that issue. It would be kind of neat to know that since we now breed this fish in captivity, that the wild population is stabilized, but I simply don't have that information. Alright, now that you've been all bored to death with what it actually is, let's talk a little bit about how to keep it happy in a glass box. And I have to say, when I was doing research on this fish to keep it myself, I have to say I came across a lot of varying issues. One is size. Man, it seems like everywhere you look, they're saying the size of the fish. I saw one particular piece of research said this fish gets 10 inches. Of course, we know that's not true. The fish does not get that big. But anyways, here's what I know about the fish. It comes from fast flowing mountain streams. So number one, you really don't want to keep this fish too hot. It's actually a subtropical species, not a tropical species. However, that being said, oftentimes fish that come from colder habitats can tolerate higher temperatures. They just don't come from them temperatures. So anything probably under 80 degrees, they could probably tolerate over 80 degrees for quite some time. They'll probably grow real fast, but probably long-term health of the fish, you want to keep them below 80 as far as temperature. pH. Number one, don't be too critical on pH is my general thing, but in my research, most of it says anywhere between 6.5 and 8.0, which basically means anything we normally call a fish tank will be just fine. This is a highly adaptable fish, and it can be kept in a soft water tank of a little bit below neutral, or a hard water tank, as far as 8.0. I've seen this fish kept with African cichlids. In my local fish shop, they have it in, and they have, I think, four of them in an African cichlid tank. And I know for a fact that the pH is above 8 in that tank. And they look incredible, they're super bright, and they're pretty big. Probably about 5 inches though, not 10. Size-wise, I think they do max out around the 5-inch mark. Somewhere around in there is more realistic. Keeping this fish as far as tank size goes, this is a really fast swimming fish. When you feed this fish, you'll know how incredibly fast this fish can be, and it likes to swim. It likes to be out in the open, and it's constantly swimming. It's not a fish that's just going to hang out under a plant or whatever. It's just constantly on the move. So I honestly think if you have really small specimens, you might be able to shoehorn them into a 3-foot long tank, but that's definitely not going to work long term. 4-foot long is probably better, and you could probably get away with some for most, probably their whole life. But in a 4-foot tank, you're shoehorning them in there. These particular fish you're looking at right now are in a 4-foot long tank, and the reason I'm doing this video right now is because I feel they're at the age now where I'm going to be moving them into a 6-foot long tank, and I wanted to get video of it to make this video before I did that. So that's it as far as water conditions and tank size. Like I said, this is not a fish that you're going to put in a 10 or a 15-gallon tank. You're definitely going to need a bare minimum 3-foot long tank, preferably a 4-foot long tank, and if you have a good group of them, a 6-foot long tank would be even better. The last thing I want to talk about on tank setup is, because this fish does come from flowing mountainous rivers, this is a fish that does appreciate a little more flow, from like power heads, hang on the back, or a canister filter, something to that effect. That they like a little bit more flow, and oxygen does need to be, it needs to be a normal fish tank. This is a fish that if you do wind up with oxygen issues, this fish will show it first, because they come from fast flowing rivers. So yeah, keep a little bit of current in the tank and everything will be just fine. Alright, when we get to the habits of this fish, again, as I was doing my research on these guys, one website would say one thing, one website would say another. Some websites would say this fish is aggressive just like any other barb. Others would say that they're aggressive to each other. I heard a lot of things. And here's what I figured out with this fish. This is just one of those fish that buy one or buy a bunch. It's that simple. It's kind of like a tiger barb. But they're way less aggressive than a tiger barb, trust me. Here's the thing that I think I saw with what these people experienced. If you buy one, that fish is going to be lonely and it's going to be looking for other fish to hang out with. The only thing is the other fish it wants to hang out with don't speak the same language as it does. And some of it might come across as aggression. I don't know. I haven't experienced this. I haven't tried to keep this fish alone. I know this is a schooling fish, so I've had no reason to keep it alone. What I have also seen is people keep them in pairs. It's a real thing in the hobby where people will go into a pet store and say, I want 2 of these and 2 of those and 2 of that, when once you become a more advanced fish keeper, you know that that's probably not a good idea for just about any species at all. Buying 2 of anything is generally a bad idea. What happens when you only have a pair is one dominant one is going to pester the other one. Generally not to the point of death, but there will be that. What I did is I walked in and saw a tank at my local fish shop that had them. They were small, and this is not a cheap fish. They tend to be a little bit pricey. Here's a cute little secret on pricey fish though. If you want them, save your pennies and get to the point where you know, hey, I gotta buy a bunch of these. Then when your fish shop does finally get them in, go to the manager or owner or whoever can make decisions and just say, how much if I buy all of them? And I'll guarantee you, if you use that phrase, he'll come down on his price. It may not be a lot, but he'll come down on the price because, hey, he just gets to sell that whole tank out. And that frees that tank out so he can bring more stock in. So he'll be all for it. I have about 11 or 12 of these. I'm not exactly sure because they're kind of hard to count. And I will say they are not aggressive to anything, including each other. I have these guys with some pretty small non-aggressive fish. There's threadfin rainbows in this tank, there's tetras, there's harlequin rasboras. They don't care. They don't nip each other, they don't nip other fish. They just swim around and wait to be fed. So aggression, I would have to say, might depend on how you keep them and in what size tank you keep them in. But if you follow my guidelines of at least a 4-foot long tank, and you have multiple individuals, probably 6, 7, 8 or more, they're not aggressive at all. They just swim around and do their thing. Alright, when it comes to how to set up the tank as far as decorations and stuff go, I have to go back to the point that this fish comes from a mountainous flowing river. So as far as being in a planted tank or a not planted tank or anything like that, I see a lot of information that says this fish needs to be in a planted tank. No, this fish does not need to be in a planted tank. The rivers that it comes from have super long stretches where it's just super rocky and there's not a plant to be found. I've seen this fish kept in African cichlid setups with not a plant anywhere in the tank. I've also seen this fish in heavily planted tanks. It does fine either way. This is a fish that's really not that picky. It does need open areas to swim around. It does need that. So anything really, any way you want to set up the tank is fine. Just leave it areas in the front of the tank to swim back and forth, and it'll be just fine. The last thing we need to talk about is food, and that's pretty simple. These fish come from captive breeding facilities, so they're already used to man-made foods. The only thing is to remember is that they're an omnivore. They have a little bit of plant matter in their diet, as well as quite a bit of protein. So just don't feed them just one food for their entire life. I mean, they need a varying diet. Just mix it up. They'll eat plenty of frozen foods as well as just about every prepared food I've ever used. Once they start getting bigger and they start putting on size, I don't know if I'd feed them flakes as a staple diet. Give them something that's a little chunky, something that they can actually bite and grab a hold of. Although their mouths aren't that big, they tend to do just fine. They'll eat anything. Just give them a varied diet and you'll be fine. One thing I will say, you can kind of look at their red stripe, and when they're not in a happy mood, that red stripe will kind of fade. And if you're feeding food and you don't see that they're not bright and shiny and not that deep red, maybe change their diet up a little bit and check your water parameters and make sure everything is good there. Like I said, they don't tolerate dissolved organics a whole lot. So if you've got them in a tank with really high nitrates, you'll see that red line start to fade, and hey, maybe I need to check my water and do a water change. Besides that, I think they're a fantastic fish, and we'll give a quick recap. And alright, real quick before I give a recap on this fish, just a quick note on when you feed these guys. They are aggressive feeders, not meaning that they're aggressively against the other fish. It's just they're really fast and they're going to eat the food really quick. So if you do keep them with more timid species, you're going to have to make provisions to make sure that those timid fish are getting their fair share. Because this fish doesn't mess around. That food hits the water, they're gone. They're going 1,000,000 miles an hour to get that food. And if you've got a fish that wants to lay back and wait for scraps, that fish might starve. So take that into consideration when you pick your tank mates. Alright, let's do a quick recap on this fish. This fish comes from India, fast-flowing mountain streams. Water parameter wise, it's really not all that picky. Anything that we consider a normal fish tank will be just fine. Just avoid the extremes. No really low pH, no real high pH. Temperature wise, they wouldn't mind being kept a little cooler than what we normally call tropical. This is a subtropical species. Food wise, they eat just about anything man-made. They don't care. Just make sure they get both plant material and protein. Tank mates, as long as you keep them in a large group, you can keep them with darn near anything. Probably anything that doesn't fit in their mouth, but they have a small mouth. I've never really seen them go after anything. Just keep them in a large group, and conspecific and non-conspecific aggression seems to be at a minimum. If you keep a single species or you keep a pair, you may wind up with issues. That I don't know. Tank size, I say minimum 3 foot long when they're little. when they start reaching teen to adult size, you're probably going to want at least a minimum of a 4-foot tank. 6-foot tank is probably better. Anyways, I hope that helps. If you have any specific questions about this fish, please feel free to comment, and I do look at the comments on occasion. Just give me time. I may not get to it right away, but if you have a question, feel free, leave the comment, and I'll let you know what my experience on them. I'm by no means an expert. So with that, you all have a nice day.